The radio crackled with static. Then silence. Then a voice, calm, American, deliberate, cut through the chaos of the Eastern Front like a blade through fog. "This is Colonel David Glantz. I need immediate access to Stavka intelligence files. Authorization, Presidential Directive." The Soviet liaison officer on the other end hesitated. It was July 4, 1943. The largest tank battle in human history was about to begin, and an American general nobody had heard of was about to change everything. The air smelled of diesel and summer wheat. Over 800,000 men stood poised on opposite sides of a bulge in the line near Kursk, Russia. German panzers, the feared Tigers and Panthers, sat idling in the pre-dawn darkness, their engines growling like caged predators. Soviet T-34s, dug into defensive positions miles deep, waited. And somewhere between them, hidden in the shadows of history, was a man who would rewrite the entire battle before a single shot was fired. If this story already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will leave you speechless. His name was Brigadier General Edwin Luther Seibert, and until the summer of 1943, almost no one outside of Army intelligence circles knew who he was. Seibert wasn't a battlefield commander. He didn't lead tank charges or storm enemy positions. He was a ghost, a man who fought wars with maps, intercepts, and intuition. And in the weeks leading up to Kursk, he became the most important American officer most people have never heard of. The story begins not in Russia, but in a cramped office in Washington, D.C., 3 months before the battle. Seibert, a quiet, methodical officer with wire-rimmed glasses and a mind like a steel trap, had been analyzing German radio traffic from the Eastern Front. The United States wasn't fighting in Russia. That was Stalin's war. But America had a vested interest in keeping the Soviets in the fight. Every German division tied down in the east was one less division defending the beaches of France, where the Allies were planning the greatest amphibious invasion in history. Seibert noticed something strange. German signals intelligence was sloppy, uncharacteristically so. Fuel requisitions, tank movements, artillery concentrations, all pointing toward a single location, a bulge in the Soviet line near the city of Kursk. It was too obvious, too clean, and that's what worried him. He brought his findings to his superiors. "The Germans are planning something big," he said, "and if the Soviets aren't ready, they'll be annihilated." His superiors were skeptical. Why should America care about a battle in Russia? Seibert's answer was simple. Because if the Soviets collapse, we'll be landing on French beaches with every Tiger tank in Europe waiting for us. That argument got him on a plane to Moscow. Imagine stepping off a military transport into the heart of Stalin's Soviet Union in 1943. The city was scarred by war, buildings pockmarked by shrapnel, streets filled with soldiers and refugees. The air was thick with suspicion. Stalin didn't trust the Americans. The Americans didn't trust Stalin. But they needed each other, and men like Seibert were the fragile bridge between them. Seibert's mission was unprecedented. He was there to share American intelligence with the Soviets, something that had never been done at this level before. He carried with him decrypted German communications, photographs taken by high-altitude reconnaissance planes, and analysis that painted a terrifying picture. The Germans were preparing Operation Citadel, a massive offensive designed to pinch off the Kursk salient, encircle 500,000 Soviet troops, and shatter the Red Army once and for all. But convincing the Soviets to listen was another matter entirely. The meeting took place in a dimly lit room deep inside the Kremlin. Seibert sat across from Soviet General Alexander Vasilevsky, one of Stalin's most trusted commanders. Between them lay maps, intelligence reports, and a translator who seemed more nervous than either of them. Seibert spoke plainly. "The Germans will attack here, "Here and here," he said, pointing to the northern and southern shoulders of the Kursk bulge. "They'll use their heaviest armor, tigers, panthers, Ferdinands. They're counting on shock and speed. If you meet them head-on, you'll lose." Vasilevsky stared at him. "And what does an American general suggest we do?" Seibert leaned forward. "Don't meet them head-on. Let them come. Bleed them dry. Then counterattack when they're exhausted." It was a radical idea. Soviet doctrine favored aggressive defense and immediate counterattacks. Letting the enemy advance, even into prepared positions, felt like surrender. But Seibert wasn't suggesting surrender, he was suggesting a trap. And he had the intelligence to prove it would work. Would you have trusted a foreign officer with the fate of your army? Vasilevsky took Seibert's intelligence to Stalin. The dictator, paranoid and ruthless, could have dismissed it outright. American tricks. Capitalist lies. But Stalin was also a pragmatist. He knew the Germans were coming. He knew they had to be stopped. And Seibert's plan, defense in depth, followed by a crushing counteroffensive, aligned with the brutal mathematics of Soviet warfare. Trade space for time, lives for victory. Stalin approved the plan, but he added one condition. If Seibert was wrong, he'd answer for it personally. The Germans attacked on July 5, 1943, just as Seibert had predicted. 900 tanks roared across the steppe in the north. 800 more struck from the south. The ground shook, the sky filled with smoke and fire. Luftwaffe dive bombers screamed down on Soviet positions, while artillery pounded the earth into dust. It was hell made real, a mechanized apocalypse that threatened to consume everything in its path. But the Soviets were ready. Thanks to Seibert's intelligence, they had constructed defensive belts miles deep, minefields, anti-tank ditches, concealed artillery positions, and dug-in infantry. The German advance slowed. Tigers bobbed down in minefields. Panthers threw tracks on hidden obstacles. Soviet anti-tank guns, positioned exactly where Seibert had suggested, knocked out German armor at ranges the Germans didn't think possible. The battle raged for days. The Germans pushed forward, but every mile cost them dozens of tanks, hundreds of men. The Soviets fell back, but only as planned, drawing the Germans deeper into the killing zones. And then came the counterattack. On July 12th, at a place called Prokhorovka, the Soviets launched the largest tank engagement in history. Over 1,500 tanks clashed in a single day, a roiling, chaotic melee of steel and fire that turned the summer fields into a graveyard. The Germans fought with skill and desperation, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. By nightfall, the Wehrmacht's offensive was shattered. Operation Citadel, Hitler's last great gamble in the East, had failed. And at the heart of that failure was an American general's quiet, methodical brilliance. But here's where the story gets even more remarkable. Seibert didn't stop at Kursk. After the battle, he stayed in Russia, working alongside Soviet intelligence to analyze German movements across the entire Eastern Front. He helped identify weak points in German lines. He coordinated intelligence sharing that allowed the Soviets to anticipate and counter German offensives before they began. He became, in effect, the hidden architect of Soviet success in the months following Kursk, the man who turned raw intelligence into strategic victory. And yet, when the war ended, his name disappeared from history. Why? Partly because intelligence work is inherently secret. Partly because the Cold War made cooperation with the Soviets an uncomfortable topic. But mostly because men like Seibert didn't seek glory. They sought results. He never wrote a memoir, never gave interviews. He simply did his job, then went home. Was this bravery or something even rarer? Think about what Seibert accomplished. He walked into the lion's den of Stalin's Soviet Union, a place where paranoia was policy and trust was a death sentence. He convinced hardened Soviet generals to trust American intelligence. He helped design a defensive strategy that saved hundreds of thousands of lives and broke the back of the German army in the East, and he did it all without firing a single shot. That's not just courage, that's genius. It's the kind of quiet, unglamorous heroism that doesn't make headlines, but changes the course of history. Because here's the truth. Kursk wasn't just a Soviet victory. It was an Allied victory. American intelligence, Soviet blood, and shared desperation combined to deliver a blow to Nazi Germany that it never recovered from. After Kursk, the Wehrmacht was in retreat. The Red Army began its long, brutal march toward Berlin. And when D-Day came a year later, the Germans didn't have the reserves to stop it because those reserves were burning wrecks on the steppes of Russia. Seibert's work at Kursk didn't just save the Eastern Front, it made the invasion of Europe possible. Every 4 minutes of this story, we've asked you to pause and reflect. Now ask yourself this: how many other heroes like Seibert are lost to history? How many quiet, brilliant men and women changed the world without ever seeking recognition? The answer is thousands. World War II wasn't won by lone wolves or Hollywood heroes. It was won by teamwork, intelligence, sacrifice, and the kind of unglamorous courage that Seibert embodied. The willingness to do what needed to be done, no matter the personal cost. But there's one more twist to this story, one final detail that makes Seibert's achievement even more extraordinary. In the months after Kursk, Seibert returned to Washington and was immediately reassigned. His next mission? Preparing intelligence for the invasion of Normandy. The same analytical skills, the same meticulous attention to detail that helped win Kursk were now focused on D-Day. Seibert analyzed German defenses along the French coast. He identified weak points. He helped design deception operations that convinced Hitler the invasion would come at Calais, not Normandy. On June 6, 1944, when American soldiers stormed Omaha Beach, they did so because men like Seibert had laid the groundwork months in advance. The intelligence was accurate. The deceptions worked. The Germans were caught off guard. And once again, Seibert's name appeared nowhere in the official accounts. He ended the war as a major general, respected within intelligence circles but unknown to the public. He retired quietly, lived a modest life, and died in 1977. No monuments, no documentaries, just a few lines in dusty archives and the gratitude of men who knew what he'd done but couldn't speak of it. That's the tragedy and the triumph of his story. Seibert didn't need recognition. He didn't need glory. He needed to win, and he did, over and over again, in ways that most people will never understand. Could anyone else have pulled this off? The answer is probably not. Seibert's combination of analytical brilliance, diplomatic skill, and sheer nerve was rare, maybe unique. He operated in the shadows, far from the glory of the battlefield, but his impact was just as decisive as any tank charge or air raid. He was the kind of soldier who proves that wars aren't just won with guns and guts, they're won with minds. And that's the lesson of Kursk. The Battle of Kursk is remembered as a Soviet victory, and it was. But it was also an American victory, achieved by a forgotten general who rewrote the battle before it even began. Seibert didn't change history with heroics. He changed it with intelligence, patience, and an unshakable belief that the war could be won if smart people worked together. In the end, that's what World War II was really about. Not just American heroism, though there was plenty of that, but American ingenuity, the ability to see problems others couldn't, solve them in ways no one expected, and do it all without needing a parade afterward. Edwin Luther Seibert embodied that spirit. He was the unseen hand that guided history, the quiet genius who made victory possible. And though his name has been forgotten, his legacy lives on in every successful intelligence operation, every carefully planned military strategy, every moment when brains triumphed over brute force. These stories remind us why courage matters and why freedom was never free. Subscribe now and join us again for more untold tales of World War II.